WisconsinEye's Campaign 2024 programming is sponsored by Wisconsin Counties Association, Nicolet National Bank, Wisconsin Hospital Association, Operating Engineers Local 139, the Wisconsin Realtors Association, the Wisconsin Laborers District Council, and North Central State's Regional Council of Carpenters. To support programs like this, please consider a tax-deductible donation at wiseye.org/donate or by texting WisCI to 44321.
Representative Steve Doyle of Onalaska is the Democratic incumbent candidate for the 94th Assembly District. The election is November 5th. Representative Doyle, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Well, thank you for participating in these candidate interviews with us. I'll start by asking you, what is your campaign's key message and why are you running for re-election?
My campaign theme message is, it's broken, we have gridlock, and something needs to change. My whole career has been built on bringing people together, working for solutions. If you go back to my law practice, I do mediation, bring people on the same page. My county board chairmanship, we called it collaboration. The county worked with cities, villages, other counties to get things done, had a great record of success, including the creation of the West Salem Business Park. In the legislature, it now is morphed into bipartisanship. In fact, if you go online and you type in www.mrbipartisan.com, that takes you to my website. I co-sponsor an equal number of Democratic and Republican bills. I work very well with both parties. I'm trying to educate my colleagues to do the same thing.
So if you're reelected, what's an example of a bill that would be a priority for you to introduce in the next session?
I think the first one would be the bill version of the amendment that I introduced in the state budget process last time, which was a 10% middle-class tax cut. I mean, we are sitting on a more than $3 billion surplus. There is no reason the state should have that money when people need it today. And so that would be the first bill I would introduce, and hopefully pretty much on day one.
Well, you've already answered part of this question then. If you're reelected, state has this projected $3 billion plus surplus. Mm-hmm. You talked about a tax cut. Is there any other part that you think should be prioritized for that surplus funding?
Schools. I mean, we all are affected by schools. We need good schools for a workforce, for educating our children, for the betterment of the community. But the problem is that we don't fund schools adequately, and so what we have is funding and budgeting by referendum. The problem with that is when the voters say, yes, we understand this is a need and we're willing to approve this referendum to give more funding to a local school district, where does that money come from? The property taxes, instead of the state paying for it. That is wrong, and we need to fully fund our schools. I voted against the last budget because it didn't fund our schools adequately, and there were other issues that were there too. But I did support our amendment to increase funding for schools. And again, I think we need to do that, and that budget surplus is enough for both the tax cut and increased funding for our schools.
So just to keep the conversation about K-12 education, what do you see as working well in K-12 education, and is there anything else that needs to change in addition to increased funding?
What is working well in K-12 education is our teachers. We have great teachers, and we prepare our teachers very well. Unfortunately, we burn them out because we put too many demands on them, and we don't pay them as I believe that we should. Things that aren't working so well are very expensive programs like special ed. I mean, our schools, especially if you have a small rural school district, it only takes one or two special ed cases, and that's a budget buster. So we need to do something about having the state really step up to the plate and absorb more of the cost of special ed. But things that I see going well in our schools is a lot of community engagement. I mean, I live in the Holman School District, and you're not going to see a more enthusiastic group of parents, even taxpayers. Like, they recognize the value of the school, and they want to make sure that we have a good school. And when we have a referendum in Holman, more often than not, almost all the time, it passes because people recognize the value. If we lose that, if people, think of things like vouchers, for example, look at, well, maybe our public schools aren't as important, we're going to lose that community identity, and that would be devastating for any community.
What about our state's higher education system? Four-year colleges, two-year colleges, technical colleges. What does the future of that system overall look like to you, and what do you think the legislature should be focusing on?
In the early part of my tenure in the State Assembly, I served on the study committee on higher education. And so we looked in depth at especially the University of Wisconsin system, and we saw that we needed to be more nimble. We're no longer, looking at a future of all bricks and mortar. In fact, they use the phrase clicks versus bricks. So much is more online now. But we're also seeing a new evolution in higher education toward the two-year schools, the tech schools, and so forth. People are discovering they don't need a four-year degree to get the job they want, but they do need some education. So I think we need to do a couple things. First of all, we need to adequately fund our public education, higher ed system. When I was in college, I remember I was in student government, and we had a program where we had students sign a thing that we submitted to the legislature saying, keep the student share of higher education no higher than 33%. Well, now it's just flipped, and the state is paying way less than the individual students are, which means that it's not accessible for everyone. So we need to deal with the funding there. I taught for 18 years at UWL, and I saw the value of higher education. I saw that these students clawed their way in, because lacrosse is a very difficult school to get in. They wanted to be there. They wanted to learn. We need to recognize that if there are people who want to get that higher education, it has to be available, and it should be in our state. They shouldn't have to go to Minnesota, for example, to do that. But we also need to look at, right now we have two systems that are working pretty well together, the UW system and the tech school system. I'm glad to see that there's more of a merging of them where you can transfer credits, you can go to one school or the other. I think that needs to be the trend for the future. Also, with artificial intelligence and so much online and so forth, we have to recognize that we should be in the front of that wave instead of being swept away by that wave.
What do you see as the state's largest workforce development challenge, and how would you propose to address it?
There's not a single answer on that one. There's a multiple answer on that one. I'm going to pick two of them, housing and childcare. Housing is a problem. Here's an example. I was talking with the lacrosse school superintendent a while back, and he was telling me one of the reasons for declining enrollment in lacrosse is that people can't move in here because there's no housing available. We look at, so many of the individual homeownership opportunities are gone these days. So when you look at rentals, there's just not a lot out there that people can afford, or that is the quality that they want to live in, especially with a family. So if you can't get the people to move into your community, they're not going to be available to work in your factories, in your restaurants, and so forth. So we've got to deal with that. I'm also on the county board in lacrosse, and we recognize that as an issue, and so we have created a program for workforce housing in West Salem so that we actually have a place that people can afford, that are not necessarily the rich people and not the poorest of the poor, but the average person working at probably an entry-level job, so they can afford housing and they can stay in our community. So that's one thing that we have to deal with. Secondly, if they're here in our community and they have kids, they need childcare. And we're not doing a good job at all on the issue of child care. Many parts of La Crosse County and Trempealeau County, which is my district, are what are referred to as child care deserts. If you can afford it, great, but you can't find it. And if you can find it, you can't afford it.
How can the state fix that?
Well, the state can fix it by incentives, in one respect. Incentives to employers to provide housing. I was recently talking with a group of hospital administrators, and that's a problem that they have. They got a lot of people that would like to work for them, but it costs them more to go to work than to stay home. And so they suggested, give some incentives, which, by the way, nonprofit hospitals wouldn't get any benefit from, but they were saying, in a general sense, this is good for our economy, good for our community. Give some incentives to employers to provide assistance for child care. If you've got a good employee, you don't want to lose them. And if it means giving some money to the child care provider, especially if you get a tax break for that, that's a win-win opportunity. I think we also have to provide just some general assistance to our child care providers. In La Crosse, before and after COVID, we lost over half of our child care slots, and we still haven't replaced all of them yet. So, we need to make it financially feasible for somebody to open a child care center. So those two opportunities, I think, are right there that we need to deal with.
Child care and housing. I have two more workforce questions for you. Investments in public and energy infrastructure grow our state's economy. This also provides an opportunity to invest in our state's workforce, but currently there are no requirements for hiring local workers. Would you support a state resident hiring requirement for state, local, and utility scale infrastructure investments?
Yes, absolutely. It makes sense. You want to look after your own initially, and you look at that as the first opportunity. Again, as I mentioned, I'm on the county board. When we are issuing RFPs or bids and so forth for projects in La Crosse County, we always try to favor our local people. It makes sense. If we want people to stay here, if we want companies to stay here, then that's what we should do, is make sure that we are giving them a little bit of a leg up. It has to make financial sense. You don't go crazy with that, but you do want to recognize that if you do focus on local businesses, local individuals, that money stays in your community. So it's a reinvestment rather than just an expense.
Employee classification is an issue in the construction industry. Some employers misclassify workers as independent contractors or pay them in cash off the books. This lowers costs by avoiding payroll taxes and unemployment insurance, and it puts compliant companies at a disadvantage when bidding on projects. Plus, misclassified workers may be denied minimum wage protections or overtime pay. Are you aware of this issue, and what do you think should be done about it?
I'm very aware of this issue because in my other life, I'm a lawyer. And so I deal with businesses that have those issues, and I've seen both sides of it. I've seen the businesses that have gotten caught playing that game, and it's kind of hard to feel sorry for them because they're ripping off the government and their employees. But I've also seen the businesses that are saying, this isn't fair. I'm trying to pay my employees a fair wage, give them benefits and so forth. And this guy down the street, I know he's paying these people cash. I know that they're not on the books. This isn't a fair system. So yes, I'm aware of that, and we need to crack down on that.
You've already shared your kind of position and thoughts on housing, but I want to ask this again. Affordable rental housing, an issue across Wisconsin. Some support government-imposed rent control. Others say that increasing rental housing is the way to go. Which of those solutions do you support, or is there some other answer?
I would increase rental housing. Rent controls, the concern I have, again, going back to my other job as a lawyer, I represent a number of landlords. These are mom and pop operations. A husband and wife have a duplex, or they have a very small 4-unit rental operation. These are not folks that are gouging their tenants. They're not trying to play games. They're just trying to get by. And they have their own expenses. They have to pay their own mortgage. They have to pay the property taxes, the insurance, and so forth, upkeep. So to simply say to them, well, you can only go a certain level, it's just not going to work. We're going to lose rental housing because these people are going to go belly up. Or
so increasing the rental housing supply is really the way to go.
Increasing the rental housing supply is what we have to do. And so I think there can be incentives for first-time entries into the rental housing unit area.
Transitioning to healthcare,
Sure.
Medical systems are facing numerous headwinds in the form of inflation, workforce development, and issues around Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement, resulting in fewer services and even the closure of a hospital system in western Wisconsin. What would you do to preserve access to care and prevent future closures?
Medicaid reimbursement is very important. I think we need to deal with that. I hear that from my hospitals, and I have 2 here in La Crosse County. I hear that all the time, that it's just not fair. They can't afford to take some of these cases. So that's number one. Number two, this is going to sound like a broken record because Democrats have been saying this for over a decade now. We need to take the Medicaid money. We have $1 billion that we're leaving on the table that's going to other states. This is our money that we've sent to Washington. They're happy to send it back, and we've been saying, no thank you, send it to wherever. That is crazy.
What about mental health care? What are you hearing about that issue in your district, and what are some solutions you support?
I hear a lot about mental health care in my district and in my profession. I do a fair amount of family law in my profession, and mental health is a big issue. And my wife is a judge. It's a big issue in the courtroom. We need to prioritize mental health care. Just talking with the hospital administrators recently, that is a losing proposition for them. I mean, if you have inpatient beds, it is difficult to break even on those. You're almost for sure going to lose money. So we need to incentivize that so that they can do a better job financially of having inpatient programs. But also then there's some new concepts, the home concept, where those services can be brought in through telehealth, et cetera, plus a doctor and nurse visiting them on a regular basis. We need to give a greater emphasis to the behavioral health care part of it, because so often that ignoring that results in physical problems and criminal justice problems. And I think that, when Governor Evers a couple years ago declared it the year of mental health, I think we need another year of mental health because we're not there yet.
How should Wisconsin move forward on the issue of abortion?
I think we should move backwards. I support Roe versus Wade. I think that that is a decision. People can have whatever moral opinion that they have on that. I mean, I was raised a Catholic. I understand both sides of that issue. But I don't think government's role is to interject themselves in between the doctor and the woman. So Roe versus Wade, I would like to see us get back to those days.
What are the pressing transportation needs in your district, and how important is it that these needs are addressed and for the state to keep on schedule with the reconstruction of our aging interstates and significant corridors of commerce?
It's a big issue in my district. Again, on the county board, we more than doubled our spending on roads in this last budget. I'm very proud of that. In fact, we would have added another $1 million, but our highway commissioner said we don't have the manpower or the equipment to deal with that. But that doesn't mean that the need isn't there. So we need to find a better way of funding our transportation system. What we've got, especially with the transition to hybrids or electric vehicles, the revenue isn't coming in there. And I say that, by the way, as a person who owns a hybrid. If we're going to have to figure out a better way to fund the transportation system. I don't support tolls. I don't think that is a good way to do it. Whether it's a combination of things like increasing the registration fees for hybrids and EVs, or increasing the gas tax a little bit, those are things that we need to look at. But bridges and roads are expensive, and they're only getting older.
PFAS and other water contaminants are a concern for a growing number of Wisconsinites. Do you see this as an important issue, and how would you propose to address it?
Well, very important issue. Not my district, but right next door to my district on French Island, that has been a critical problem. People are drinking bottled water at this point, and have for quite some time. Joint Finance is sitting on some money right now that could be released to start to deal with that issue. The problem on that issue right now, the fight between Democrats and Republicans, is what kind of a pass people get on it. I heard my opponent make a comment that Democrats are going after farmers by making them liable for cleanup of PFAS. That is not at all the case. What we are looking at is not to give a get out of jail free card to the producers of PFAS. And that would be very simple. A first-year law student could write the amendment to the bill to say, this only applies to the producer, not to the end user. In other words, the farmer who spreads it on the field, not liable. But the people, those multinational companies that are making billions of dollars, should be paying for the cost of cleanup and remediation going forward, not the taxpayers. That is a philosophical difference that we have with the other party.
We are down to our last two questions.
All right.
How would you describe the leading differences between you and your opponent?
I think the biggest difference is experience. I have been doing this job, and I've been doing it very successfully. I pass bills all the time. Many of them don't have my name as the first author. It's more like the second or third author. But a lot of times they came from me. But knowing that the Republicans weren't going to pass a bill from a Democrat, I give it to a friendly colleague, and we've gotten a lot done that way. I've been on numerous speakers' task forces, child welfare, abortion, adoption, suicide prevention, artificial intelligence, and so I've gotten a lot done. My opponent is looking at this as kind of the assembly as entry level. I think that getting experience serving in local government, he's had 2 years since the last election to get elected to local government, to join like Rotary or Lions Club or JC's, do something for your community rather than have your community do something for you, like electing you to office. Those are the things that I think are the mark of maturity. And I've run my own business for 30-some years. I've served in local government. I've served on more nonprofit organizations than I can count. I'm married. I raised a family. I own a home. A hobby farm. I pay property taxes. I think I can relate to the struggles that our families are feeling today because I am one of them. Lived here my whole life. This is my community. These are my people.
I know you've been waiting for the magic wand question. We are to the magic wand question. Let's say you're reelected to office and you could have a magic wand to use in the state capitol and have just one issue resolved in a way that brings people together. What is the issue?
In the private sector, they have this concept called pay for performance. The more you do, the more you get paid. And I think going along with that, if you don't do diddly, you shouldn't get paid. So when the legislature has, record low production like we've had this last session, actually the session before, where, sometimes we gavel in and gavel out, we don't vote on things, everything, there's gridlock, nothing's getting passed, people are just shouting at each other or past each other. If I had a magic wand, I would create a barrier around the Capitol and lock everybody in there until they solved the problems. And if they didn't solve the problems, they don't get paid. That would be what my magic wand would do.
Well, thank you, Representative Steve Doyle of Onalaska, the Democratic incumbent candidate for the 94th Assembly District. The election is November 5th. Representative Doyle, thank you for talking with WisconsinEye.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
This programming is brought to you by our generous sponsors. Thank you for watching.